Well, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue where we left off last week, talking about the age of the earth. We covered last session how it is really a critical topic. You know, this age, how old is this earth anyway, you know? Not this particular one, but, you know, the model. But the real one, how old is it? Well, there are all kinds of scientific ways to show the earth is not billions of years old, like the illustration of the, you know, you find a dinosaur bone, you know, there's no date on it. Or you find coins in a box in a sunken ship. You know, the youngest coin determines, it limits it down to whatever that number is. The Bible clearly teaches about 6,000. If you add up the dates in Scripture, everybody does it, you get about 6,000. You can get Bishop Ussher's book we've got in the bookstore there. It's like huge. It's an excellent book. I mean, it's really thorough, more thorough than necessary, but somebody had to write that one so somebody else could summarize it. But let's look at some scientific ways to show the earth is simply not billions of years old. In 1999, announcements came out over newspapers all over the country that the world's top population has topped 6 billion. How do they know that? I have no idea, okay? Probably it's a guess, but I think it's a reasonable guess, all right? 6 billion people on planet Earth. In 1985, the world's population was announced to be 5 billion. In 1977, 4 billion. 1962, 3 billion. Interesting thought. Many people born in 1962, many people born in 1930 are still alive. They're 75 years old. It has been said, I don't think there's any way to prove it, but it has been said there could be more people alive today than there are people that are dead today. How's that for a thought? Certainly, we probably could have half of the total world's population still alive. I don't know that that's true, but certainly there's a whole lot of people alive today. Probably the best soul-winning opportunity the world's ever seen is right now. So, back in 1800, the world's population was 1 billion. Now, there just is no question about this. Everybody agrees about a billion. You can go to University of West Florida right up here and get in the library and look up population statistics in the, I forget where it was now in the library, but I found a book in there. I think it was by World Book Encyclopedia, or one of the encyclopedia companies did a chart showing the population of the world at different times through history. And they had, everybody agrees, this is the basic numbers. But look what they did on this chart here. It goes to a billion in 1810, and then it goes back to 1100 AD, which is only 900 years ago. Then you see that little gap in there? They get a little gap in it. Then it goes to 4000 BC. Now wait. Are you telling me from 4000 BC to 1000 AD, for 5,000 years there was no population growth? Isn't that what they're trying to show by this chart? No population growth in 5,000 years. That's not the way it works. Okay? Population in 1800 was about a billion. People say, well, the world's overcrowded. No, the world is not overcrowded. There's all kinds of propaganda going on about the world being overcrowded. It is pure baloney. National Geographic ran an article October 99. So, is the world overcrowded? Now, here's the thing. A guy named Thomas Malthus, M-A-L-T-H-U-S. Thomas Malthus did an essay many, many years ago and said, this is way before Darwin, and he said something strange. You want to write this one down. Malthus said, there are more people born than can possibly survive. So it is best if the weakest die off. That book that Malthus wrote had a real profound effect on Charlie Darwin. Darwin read that and said, wow, that's right. This would have been late 1700s, I think. I don't know when Malthus did his essay, but it was before Darwin was even born, I believe. But Thomas Malthus said, populations grow geometrically. You know, you go 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. You do that a couple times and you got a gigantic number, okay? He said populations multiply and the food production increases by addition. Something along those lines. Don't quote me on that exactly, but basically Malthus said the ability to produce food, it increases arithmetically, whereas the population numbers increase geometrically. Major mistake. That is not correct. Because the more people you have to plow the fields and pick the corn and, you know, etc., etc. It is not correct. But Malthus very convincingly argued the point that It is not possible for everybody that's born to survive. So it's really best if the weakest die off. Thomas Malthus was one of the key people influencing Charles Darwin. Another one would be his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who he wrote a book called Zoonomia in 1802, I believe. And he said basically everything Darwin said later, his grandpa said. Now his grandpa, Erasmus Darwin, was an interesting fellow. He was a medical doctor. He would be the equivalent of an atheist today, though back then nobody claimed to be an atheist because you wouldn't have any friends, okay? 1800, nobody would like you. He was huge, huge guy. They had to cut out the table for him to fit his belly in there so he could sit up to the table to eat. They cut a notch in the table, they really did. Thomas Malthus, giant guy. Medical doctor, and really hated the concept of the Bible being an authority over him. So he kind of did all the primary work, and then Darwin, his grandson, took the credit for it with the great theory of evolution. But here they're always running articles, the world's overcrowded. Now I want you to understand, when Darwin's book came out in 1859, this was a common teaching that there are more people born than can possibly survive. How many have ever seen the movie at Christmas time called The Christmas Story? You ever watch that thing, with Ebenezer Scrooge? Yeah. There's a famous line in there. There's all kinds of famous lines in that movie. But Tiny Tim is sick, and they're talking to Scrooge saying, oh, Tim is sick, the ghost of Christmas present or whatever it is talking to Scrooge, And Scrooge says, well, if he's going to die, let him die and decrease the surplus population. That has been a common teaching for centuries, that we really need to, thin down the population, called the herd. In reality, the entire population on the planet today would fit inside Jacksonville, Florida, twice. That one city has 25 billion square feet. If there are 6 billion people on the planet, everybody could have 2 foot by 2 foot area to stand in, which is not even as crowded as an elevator. The whole world could go stand in Jacksonville, Florida, easily, and probably get them in there twice. Give everybody 2 square feet to stand on. Some take more than that, some take a whole lot less, People say the world's overcrowded. I say, you've got to be kidding. Have you driven across Nebraska or Texas or Kansas or New Mexico? I remember my son-in-law Paul and I were driving back from someplace, New Mexico, I was preaching, and here it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. We're driving all the way back trying to get to the airport in time for a 5 o'clock flight and a 3-hour drive. I forget what it was. We stopped the car first of all, we just shut the headlights off and drove for probably 60 miles with no headlights on, just trying to drive by starlight. I mean, there was nobody out there. Drove for miles and miles and miles and miles. Didn't have headlights on. Finally, we stopped the car, middle of the highway, got out and laid down on the road, looking up at the stars. I mean, it was phenomenal how many stars were out there, just incredible. Here we are on a pretty major highway, and there's nobody there. I mean, nobody. For hours, nobody was there. If you drive around the country or fly around the country, just look out of the window of the airplane once in a while, okay? The world is not overcrowded. You can drive from here to Tallahassee, 200 miles east. We think, oh, the whole east coast of America is popular. Man, go from here to Tallahassee. There is nothing but pine trees between here and Tallahassee. Albert, you drove it a couple times. I mean, it's just nothing. A couple of hills. Oh, wow, look at the excitement hill. Oh, nothing else there. The world's not overcrowded. The population of Escambia County, where we live, it would take about 2 Escambia counties to equal the entire population of Alaska. The North Slope of Alaska, they don't have counties up there, they have boroughs, okay? In Louisiana they call them a parish, and here we call them a county. Most states call them a county, but up there they call it a borough. The North Slope borough, if I recall, it's about twice the size of Ohio, that one county. The entire population is 10,000. There's going to be more people than that in the one church building I'm speaking at this Sunday up at First Baptist Church, Hammond, Indiana. Just in one building, okay? I spoke at Chuck Smith's church in California, 14,000 people. That's greater than the entire population of the whole borough. And no, I said, what? And by the way, nearly all of those are concentrated in 2 towns. In Barrow, Alaska, and I forget the other one. Barrow has, I think, 6,000. The other town has 3 or something like that. I don't know. It's not much. So I said, what's property cost up here? Cost? What do you mean cost? Come on up. You can have all you want. We'll give it to you. Nobody wants to stay there. The world is simply not overcrowded. The point is, they're lying. Now, why would somebody teach the world is overcrowded? What would be a motive behind teaching something like that? Anybody got any ideas? Decrease population. Why would you want to decrease population? Well, it's easier to control. There are some super rich bazillionaires who they have, just like Pinky in the brain, they honestly have a sincere desire to control the world. And they think there's just too many people out there. No, I think the world's doing fine. I tell folks, if it's overcrowded where you are, then move, okay? It's not overcrowded. I dug for dinosaur bones on a lady's ranch in Colorado. Right near Dinosaur Valley, Dinosaur Monument, what's it called in Utah? Vernal, Utah. They call that the dinosaur something. All the streets are named after dinosaurs and all that, Vernal, Utah. But we drove and drove and drove, flew to Salt Lake City and drove out. I asked this lady, I said, how big is your ranch? She said, well, it's 213,000 acres. That's like 38 square miles of ranch. It goes all the way up to Wyoming, and she told me the borders. I couldn't believe it. I said, what's property cost out here? She said, oh, about, I think it was 17 cents an acre or something like that. It's phenomenal. When I was in South Dakota staying at this farmer's house, he said, well, we're thinking about buying the field across the street to add to the farm. I said, how big is it? He said, it's, I don't know, like 10,000 acres. This was to add to his farm, okay, 10,000 acres. I said, what's he want for it? He said, well, he wants, 50 cents an acre. That's kind of high. I'm going to try to talk him down. People just don't have a clue. Try to buy an acre in downtown Los Angeles or Hawaii. I remember years ago, my mom, before she died, my mom and dad were in real estate. And they were in Hawaii on a trip over there for something, and they said land in downtown Honolulu on the beach is, at that time, it was $500 a square foot. When I was in Japan, Tokyo, I've never seen a place so crowded with people. They had a button on the dash. I said, what's this button for? He said, oh, that's to pull the mirrors in. Hit the button, pulled the mirrors in on the car, so that when you're driving down the highway, you don't clip your mirror off on somebody else's. Because what in America would be a 2-lane highway, over there is like a 4-lane highway. I mean, the lanes are half the size. When we came to his house, he said, now everybody's got to get out of the car because when I pull into my parking place, there's no room to open the doors. Except the driver's door. So we all got out. He pulls into his parking spot. He said, over in Japan, you're not allowed to own a car unless you can prove you have a place to park it. You can't even buy it until you can prove you got a place to park it. And we went into this house. The house was about the size of this room we're in, okay? 3 stories tall. I said, what's a house like this worth? He said, oh, $400,000. He said, but that would only be for the land. They would tear the house down and just to have the land. $400,000. There are some places where it's real crowded. I agree. But there are some places where it's not real crowded. But back when Jesus was on the earth, the population of the earth was about 250 million. People say, how do they know that? Well, how would you know that? Why was Jesus born in Bethlehem? Anybody know? Census. Herod's taken a census. All the kings have always counted their people. Why? Money. Sure. How many of you are there? How much money can I get? Okay. So this is a guesstimate. It is a very reasonable guesstimate, but it is a guesstimate. Nobody knows for sure, but 250 million at the time of Christ is what most books on population will say. I've seen something that say 200,000. 250 million is 250,000. It doesn't matter. But this is a reasonable number. Based on this, now people say, what about plagues and famines? One person wrote in today to my radio program and said, oh, Hovind, you're an idiot. What about plagues and famines and the population, stuff like that? This is taking all that into consideration. Actually, this graph is based on the known population at certain times. Now, let's suppose you have a plague in Europe in the 1300s, and it kills 1/3 of the entire population of Europe. You get a little blip in the scale, and it goes right back up. There are several reasons why it goes right back up. Number one, the plague's only in Europe. There's still plenty of people having kids in other parts of the world, okay? And it's very quick for a population to recover if the infrastructure is already in place. Sure, the people died, but they left their house. The streets are there, the wells are already dug, the fields are already plowed. So the infrastructure didn't change. So now, afterwards, man, you might as well have 12 kids because basically they can get their own house for free. There's no economic incentive to have a small family after a great plague or something like that. The more kids you have, the more easier to take care of the farm. Okay? So the plagues and population blips in the scale are short-lived and minimal effect. Even now, the plagues going across, some parts of the world that are killing off, thousands of people. It'll have close to zero effect on the population growth. That's one of the many reasons. Okay. Some people say, well, the population, man's been here for millions of years. Now, that's ludicrous. I have on my chart here that before the flood, I just picked a number. You can see the question mark there. 1 billion people. I don't have a clue. Nobody has a clue. I have no way of telling. Okay. The reason I picked that number, it's a lot shorter time than we've had since the flood, where we now have 6 billion. But they probably had more rapid population growth before the flood. Why would populations grow faster before the flood? They're living longer. You're having kids for 800 years. You can have a lot of kids in 800 years, okay? Like a lot of kids. But if man had been here for millions of years like they tell us, the population today would be so incredible. We'd have about 150,000 people per square inch. That would be overcrowded. Now, by the way, today only 3% of the earth is habitable. 70% is underwater to start off, okay? A lot of the rest of it's deserts or ice caps that are uninhabitable. When I flew to Saskatoon, Canada, we got off the airport and drove, I don't know how far north, and the guy said, this is about the edge of human farming. From here north, there just isn't much because crops won't grow. And we were only at about the, I don't know, 52 or 3 or 4 degrees north of the equator. It goes to 90. We were just past halfway to the equator, to the North Pole, okay? Sorry, North Pole. So there's a huge section of this planet up around the North Pole that is uninhabitable or certainly extremely sparsely populated. And at the South Pole, nobody lives there without incredible outside support structure. You could not live down there off the land. I would challenge anybody to do that, okay? You got to have an airplane come in every once in a while and bring them supplies, or they're not going to make it. So 3% of the earth is habitable for mankind. The earth is not overcrowded today, though, but it sure would have been had man been here for millions of years. In Genesis 1, God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. That means fill the earth, have a lot of kids. The Bible says in Isaiah 45, He formed it to be inhabited. Why did God make this place? To fill it up with people. Interesting, the very first command God gave to Adam. First command. Anybody know what that was? Be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. The greatest drive He gave to just about every species on the planet is to do exactly that. After the storm comes through here and breaks off half the branches on these pecan trees, you know what they do the next year? They put out incredible numbers of pecans. They're going to just, we're going to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, okay? And just about the greatest drive every species has is that drive to be fruitful, multiply, to fulfill God's command. So even all the perverts in the world, even the Bill Clintons and the Hugh Hefners and the Playboy crowd, they're going to give glory to God on Judgment Day because their very wicked lifestyle is proof God's God. God's in charge. Judgment Day, God's going to say, look at this. Here's what I said. I gave you this command, I gave you this desire, and I gave you these rules. You followed the command, you took care of the desire, you didn't follow the rules. You're in trouble. That's what it's going to be. Okay, God formed it to be inhabited. But there are people like Jacques Cousteau who said, in order to stabilize world population, we must eliminate 350,000 people a day. Now, Jacques Cousteau was one of those guys who really wanted a one world government, a new world order, you know, let's save the planet. We got to kill all the people to save the planet. By the way, all the quotes are referenced at the bottom of the screen here. Ted Turner, president of CNN, said, what's the Communist News Network? A total world population of 250 to 300 million people. A 95% decline would be ideal. Okay, Ted, you first, okay? Why? Now, I guarantee if he wants only 5% of the world to survive. Anybody want to take a guess? Would he be in the 5% or in the 95%? He'd be in the 5, of course, you know. Yeah, of course. There are some New World Order type people who really have plans and methods of reducing the population. They would like 500 million people as soon as possible. The Lord told the serpent in the Garden of Eden, after he tricked Eve, you know, he said, you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust all your life. Then he said something amazing. He said, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. By the way, let me stop here and kick this rabbit or chase this rabbit as we walk by. For centuries, it was taught the man has the seed, the woman is only the incubator. It was taught that the woman incubates the baby for the man's seed provides all the information for the baby. God said 6,000 years ago, the woman has a seed also. That was just discovered in the last few hundred years. Wow, sure enough, the woman has half the genetic information to provide for the baby. But between thy seed and her seed, I mean, all you got to do is read the Bible. It's got all kinds of biological stuff in there if you just look for it. And then he says, it, talking about the seed of the woman, shall bruise thy, talking about Satan. The seed of the woman is going to bruise your head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. This verse is apparently the first prophecy that God's going to send a Redeemer to get man back. This was after Adam and Eve sinned. God's putting the curse on them. He said to the man, you know, did you eat off the tree? And he said, what every man says, the woman that you gave me, you know, passed the buck twice. It's her fault, and it's really your fault for giving her to me, God. You know, that's what he said. The woman whom thou gavest me, he's trying to, God, I mean, you can't really get after me because, you know, you're the one that had this idea, not me, okay? And then he said to the woman, did you eat off the tree? And what did she say? The serpent, of course, implying that you made, Lord, you know, you're a serpent, not mine. I didn't make that thing, okay? Always pass the buck. He says to the serpent, which can't talk back, you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust all your life. And he says to the woman, you're going to have pain in childbearing. And part of the curse, actually, part of the curse. Anybody remember the other half of the curse? The first half was pain in childbearing. What's the second half of the curse? To the woman. Desire to be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. It's part of the curse. Man's the head of the house. And it really is a curse in many cases. Okay? And then to the man, he said, cursed is the ground for thy sake. Think about that. Adam, I'm putting a curse on the ground for your own good. That's why welfare is so devastating to a country. If you don't have to work, you sit around thinking up ways to get into trouble. I see these kids in high school, you know, the daddy buys them a new car, buys them everything they need, they never have to work. Sit around thinking up ways to get in trouble. Man, if you got to go to school 6 hours or 7 hours and then come home and work 6 hours before you go to bed, you don't have time to get in trouble, okay? I really would like to get in trouble, but I'm just too tired, okay? And all the buddies are calling you, hey, you want to go out and party tonight? No, man, are you kidding? I got to get up at 4 in the morning and throw papers, you know, or whatever. Work, especially for a youngster, is one of the best things for him. Great therapy. 1 Thessalonians says, if any would not work, neither shall he eat. That's God's welfare program. Real simple. Don't work, you don't eat. What I did with my kids when they were growing up, only had to do it once. It was always a threat. Here's the list of things to get done. Supper's at 6 o'clock. They show up at 6 o'clock. Hey, let's pray. Lord, bless the food. You know, bless the bunch as they crunch the lunch. Amen. Oh, before you eat a thing, I've been going over the list here, and Eric, I noticed you had 4 things on your list. You didn't do any of them, did you? No, Dad. I got busy, you know, playing basketball, TV, whatever. Oh, well, son, sorry. Go finish the list. Come back and eat when you're done. You don't work, you don't eat. Simple welfare program. Real simple. Absolutely idiot-proof. You no work, no eat. Simple. Anyway, God said, back to Genesis 3, it shall bruise thy head. Now, Satan here was warned, someday a seed of the woman is going to bruise your head. And thou shalt bruise his heel. How many of you ever stepped on a stone and had what's called a stone bruise on your heel? You ever had one of those? They hurt like crazy, okay? One of Saddam Hussein's sons, I forget which one it was, loved to torture people just to keep them in line over there in Iraq. They showed something on TV about the stuff he did to the people over there. Unbelievable, you know. He would get their ankles in like the equivalent of stocks, you know, and put their feet off the ground. They're laying on the ground with their feet up. And he would take a billy club or a small ball bat and beat the bottom of their feet. Every part of your body hurts when you beat the bottom of your feet. Okay? You can cause pain in your earlobe by beating the bottom of your feet. Okay? How many have ever been to a reflexologist, a guy who massages the feet to get rid of the... You ever seen that? We had a guy in Kankakee, Illinois, when we first moved up there. One guy in our church was a chiropractor. When Ken Andrew there on the camera was 6 or 8, 9 months old, I guess. Okay, we took him to this chiropractor and really helped straighten out his back and got a lot of medical problems straight. He said, you also need to take him to my buddy who's a reflexologist. I said, who's a what? Yeah, he massages your feet. I said, yes. What's that going to do? He said, oh, every part of your body has nerves that end in your feet and your hands. And you can, by rubbing certain parts of the feet or the hands, really help a lot of medical problems. And I thought, yeah, right. You know, I'm a biology teacher. Yeah, I'm not buying this. This is voodoo, man. You know, voodoo, witchcraft, you know, stuff like that. So I went totally non-believer, okay? I said, I'm not going to tell this guy anything wrong with me. I had had 3 whiplashes and had real serious back problem, T3, the 3rd thoracic down. I went to the chiropractor today for it again. I've been going for 30 years. I said, I'm going to just see what this guy can tell me. You know, they say he can tell from your feet what's wrong with you. I said, I don't believe it. I sat down, lazy boy, plopped my feet up, you know, the rock back, laid there. He started rubbing my feet. After about 15 seconds, he hit a spot. I jumped. He said, wow, you have back trouble, don't you? I said, oh, why? Why would you say that? He said, because this spot. Oh, okay. He said, I would say it's in the center of your back. Looks like 3rd or 4th thoracic is out of place. As he played with that spot, and I squirmed in the chair. He was able to feel the bottom of my feet, squeezing, and told me everything wrong with me exactly to the T, 100%. Got it exactly right. How many of you have been to the guy in Milton that we call him the witch doctor here? He looks in your eye and looks at the iris, keeps looking at a chart, looks at his book, looks at your eye, looks at the chart, tells you everything wrong with you looking at your eye. The strangest thing, he got mine 100% right just, 6 months ago when I went there the first time. Said, let me see your eye, you know. But a bruise to the heel is incredibly painful, but it's usually not fatal. Okay? Anybody know the only person killed with a bruise to the heel? Achilles, right. So the story goes, you know, is somebody told him, you dip your baby in the water and he'll be invincible, you know. So she held him by the heel, dipped him in, and is invincible, except for that one heel where she held him, you know, Achilles' heel. Who cares? But a bruise to the heel is incredibly painful, but not fatal. Christ was bruised in the heel when Satan had him crucified on the cross, but he rose from the dead. Very painful. Crucifixion, probably one of the worst ways to die. You know, pound the nail right through the wrist, right here where all the nerves are. And not only your nerves for heat, your nerves for pressure, your nerves for pleasure. You got all kinds of different nerves in your hands, you know, different types of nerves. They all run right through there. You know, they would nail them right there between the carpal bones, because here it just rip out, you know. Nail them right through there. So you get to feel everything all the time. The guy who broke his arm, remember he got stuck in the cave. He's out climbing around by himself. Was it just last year? Mountain climbing, got his hand stuck in the rock, you know. Broke his own arm off, and then had his pocket knife, which he kept sharpening on the rock, and he cut his arm off. He said when he got to the nerve, lightning went through his body, you know, as he cut that nerve. He said, oh, that weird feeling, and cutting the nerve. Well, a bruise to the heel is incredibly painful, but seldom fatal. A bruise to the head, though, can be fatal. So this is a promise. God says, this seed of the woman is going to bruise your head. Now Satan, of course, knowing that someday some seed of the woman is going to bruise his head, he has worked very hard to try to corrupt humanity all the way through. 1,600 years after Satan was told, some seed of the woman is going to bruise your head, he had corrupted just about the entire planet. There was only one guy he didn't get corrupted. Anybody know who that was? 1,600 years after the creation? Noah. Then Later on, Satan gets almost the whole world, and he just misses one. And that's the one God works through. God's preserving this seed all the way down. And you can read it about in Revelation, about the end times, how he's going to try again to destroy the seed of the woman. In Revelation chapter 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there. Okay. Anyway, it is Satan's desire to kill every human on the planet. Remember when Herod was going to kill baby Jesus in Bethlehem? What did he do? He killed all the children. Let's just kill them all, to be sure to get the right one. Now, it is purely Jewish tradition. I don't know that this could be proven in any way, but Bethlehem's not a very big town. Even today, it's not a very big town. Okay. So the Jewish tradition is that there were 22 babies killed, one for each letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet. 22 babies killed that night. Herod apparently later was called into question for this. I mean, obviously, hey, what are you going to town and kill all the babies for? You know, he has a boss too, you know. And so the whole story of this is found in the Archco volume, which we sell in the library there. Now, whether the Archco volume is legitimate or not, I don't know. There are some real serious arguments about it. It's a forgery, blah, 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 etc. I don't know. It's amazing reading. If it's true, yay. If it's not true, it's still amazing reading, okay? Type of historical stuff. If you haven't seen the Archco, A-R-C-H-K-O, you might want to take a look at that and read some of that. But anyway, Herod was called into question for killing all this, but the bottom line is his goal was to kill Jesus, and so he killed 22 innocent people. There have always been dictators who want to work that way. You know, they want to accomplish a goal. If you got to kill some innocent people in the meantime, oh well. You know, if you have to blow up the Twin Towers to get your bill passed, you know, oh well, let's blow up the Twin Towers. Innocent people don't matter. Charles Wooster, who works for the Environmental Defense Fund, said, people are the cause of all the problems. We have too many of them. We need to get rid of some of them. Of course, he's not in the ones that need to go. And they were talking about banning DDT, which had some problems, of course, but was very effective at what it did. In the old days, they used to soak lumber in creosote. Anybody remember the old timers remember the creosoted poles? Man, and they used to put, what's the stuff they used to put around your house to get the termites out that they banned? It worked really well for termites, and anything that works good has been taken off the market, you know. Now you got to have stuff that brings them in. What Termidor is what we use now, you know. It brings them in, and they eat it and go back to the hive or whatever the tribe and the colony and kill them. But here they were talking about banning DDT, and Wooster said, well, if we ban DDT, it will help lower the population of people. Interesting. Bill Clinton, spelled with a K intentionally there because of his communist leanings, Bill Clinton signed the Biodiversity Treaty in 1993, which says, we must either reduce Earth's human population to 1 billion or reduce the standard of living to an agrarian peasant status. What are they trying to do? There are 6 billion people on the planet. They would like to reduce the population to 1 billion or make everybody a peasant. Because a farmer, you know, he doesn't have much impact on the ecology like a person driving a car, you know, and wanting actually hot water in their house, you know, and actually building a road. And, you know. The United States was divided up years ago to protect the biodiversity, you know, to protect the animals. And this map shows the proposed biodiversity impact. The red areas are for animals only. No humans allowed, period. The yellow areas are for buffer zones to protect the animals. You can go in the yellow area if you have a special pass. Green areas are for humans. It goes back to the animal rights, you know, mentality. Animals have rights. I agree. They taste really good on a hamburger, you know, you can. But that's the plan anyway, to reduce the population close to, you know, to 500 million. Peter Singer, Princeton University professor, who I'd love to debate. I don't know if he's even still alive. I think he is. He said, Christianity is our foe. If animal rights is to succeed, we must destroy this Judeo-Christian religious tradition. Peter Singer, by the way, is trying to pass legislation that allows abortions after the baby's born. You have 28 days to decide if you want to keep it. Sounds like the Spartans, you know, 2,000 years ago. Are we going back to heathenism? Peter Singer gets his way, we will. A couple good websites about that, if you want to see about Peter Singer's philosophy. Alan Gregg said, he works for the Rockefeller Foundation, the world has cancer and the cancer is man. Where do people get a dumb idea like this? The Bible says God created the world for it's His world, but He created it for us. He gave us, dominion over the earth. Prince Philip, who's the husband of Queen Elizabeth, and she's the one who invented the microwave. It goes like that. Think about it. You'll get it in about 20 minutes, okay? Prince Philip said, if I could be reincarnated, I would wish to return to Earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels. You say, man, that's terrible. Well, especially when you consider he's got a huge majority holding in ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, which is one of the largest food distributors in the world. Suppose you get a guy in charge of a company like that decides, okay, we're going to quietly put everything into place, and at a given signal, everybody dump something into the food supply, and we're going to lower the population in less than a week. He's in a position to do it. You get a guy with a motive and a method, most courts are going to look at that as, well, this is a dangerous situation here. Yes, sir?
I was going to say, he just played it off as a virus.
Sure. Oh, the chicken flu, killed everybody or whatever, They'll have I'm sure they got a cover story. I mean, that's obvious. You got to have a cover story. It makes you stop and wonder, what's really causing this? You need to go to billsardi.com if you want to see some of these new flus everybody's worried about, all the the birds dying off, killing them off. Go to billsardi.com and read his website about that. Some of these viruses are deliberately being injected to lower the population. There's a great book I read a few months ago called Seeds of Deception, Genetically Engineered Foods. Monsanto Corporation, including right here in Pensacola, are they still in operation here in Pensacola? Monsanto? A big company for years, as far as I know they are. And many other companies, but primarily Monsanto, has tried to corner the market on food production with genetically modified foods. Now, they've been banned in Europe. But 70% of the foods eaten by U.S. consumers that are processed foods, contain genetically modified. Go to Taco Bell, you get their tortilla, which has corn, which is genetically modified. What do? Well, they take the gene code and they modify it. Here's what the goal is: to get the seed to already have the pesticide built in to the gene code. So as it grows, the animals won't eat it. So in Europe, as they started doing this genetically modified food, people started noticing the butterflies are dying off. The butterfly goes to suck the juice out of the flower like he's done all of his life, and all of a sudden he croaks. And so to save the butterflies, they banned the genetically modified food. Now the fact that it kills people, oh well, Here's an article from this page from this book, Seeds of Deception, which we sell, by the way, in our bookstore. It's not a Christian book, but in May 2003, President Bush proposed an initiative to end hunger in Africa using genetically modified foods. He also blamed Europe's unfounded, unscientific fears of these foods for hindering efforts to end hunger. Bush was convinced that GM food, genetically modified, held the key to greater yields, expanded U.S. exports, and a better world. His rhetoric is not new. It's been passed down from president to president and delivered to the American people through regular news reports and industry advertisements. The message was part of a master plan that has been crafted by corporations determined to control the world's food supply. Keep in mind, love of money, root of all evil. This was made clear in a biotech industry conference in '99, where a representative from Arthur Andersen Consulting Group explained how his company had helped Monsanto create that plan. First, they asked Monsanto what their ideal future looked like in 15 to 20 years. Monsanto executives described a world with 100% of all commercial seeds genetically modified and patented. Love of money, got to get a patent. Anderson then worked backward from that goal and developed the strategy and tactics to achieve it. They presented Monsanto with the steps and procedures needed to obtain a place of industry dominance in a world in which natural seeds were virtually extinct. Now think about it. For centuries, for all of human history, the farmer plants his corn, harvests the field, saves back part of his corn for seed for next year, right? That's normal. If you eat it all, now what are you going to plant next year? So there have been some companies whose full-time business is creating what's called seed corn. I grew up in the middle of Illinois, middle of corn country. Seed corn is grown all over there. So there are companies that all they do is plant, thousands of acres of corn, not to eat, but for seed, for the next year's corn. So the farmer harvests his field, sells all his corn, goes and buys his seed for the next year. That way, because when you get hybrid corn, or hybrid anything, with the first generation you get your ultimate results. After that it begins to go downhill again. You crossbreed, two special dogs and you get the super dog, but then after that it reverts back toward a mutt, within a few generations. So the farmers have learned, hey, let's just buy seed corn, which is, the first generation's always bigger, better, and we get more money, basically, more bushels, therefore, all goes back to love of money. Well, not only is Monsanto working to get seeds that only they sell, and therefore everybody has to come to them, which is called a monopoly, which means guess what they're going to do? When they've got the only seeds that'll grow, you raise the price. Everybody gets rich. Love of money, root of all evil. Part of the plan is chemtrails. Go to chemtrails911.com. Chemtrails stands for chemical trails. The goal is to spray the earth with aluminum oxide, I believe, is the primary thing. This makes the soil such that basically the genetically modified foods are the best ones to grow in it. Spending bazillions of dollars spraying the atmosphere with things that are going to, of course, here's the cover story is, we're trying to reflect back some of the sunlight so that we don't have global warming. The reality is this stuff they're spraying out is going to electrify the soil. There's a good article in New American, which is the John Birch Society's magazine. I'm not a member of the John Birch Society, nor am I against them. I'm very much for them, but I'm not a member of anything except the Lord's kingdom in my family. But they have engineered extinction. The goal is to destroy America's resources and the world's resources. United Nations has a philosophy, very simple, food is power. We use it to control behavior. We do not apologize. They want to reduce the population by whatever means possible. Let's take about a 5-minute break and come back and talk about more of the plans for the New World Order and what you can do about it after a few minutes. All right, let's go back to the population control. United Nations folks said food is power. We use it to control behavior. We do not apologize. Boy, they can sure do that too, What if a famine hits a country? They want everybody to move into the city where they can control them a little better. Well, let's just have food distribution because of the famine. But of course, we're going to do it where we want you to come. You come to us to get the food. Len Horowitz has a great video out. I believe it's in book form also, called Emerging Viruses. If you're in the military or you're considering having your children vaccinated or getting vaccinated yourself for anything, flu vaccine included, you better read about what's really happening with vaccines. I'm not a doctor and I'm not going to give any medical advice, but I'm going to tell you, I would really think twice about that. Tetrahedron.org is a good website that deals with this topic, as does BillSardi.com. Actually, I think Bill Sardi's website is actually Knowledge of Health. But if you go to BillSardi.com, it'll come up, it'll trip over to his website automatically. There's another one called VacLib.org, Vaccination Liberation. Let's stop vaccinating. That book, these two books here, Vaccines, The Deadly Deception, and The Power of Healing, The Power of God, are available in the bookstore right next door. There were 22,000 reports of hospitalizations and injuries, including 300 deaths, following hepatitis B vaccines. I lost the date in my notes. I think it was since '96, but I may be incorrect on that. Mary Tocco, T-O-C-C-O, lives in Michigan and travels and speaks on the dangers of vaccinations. A lot of people are getting like autism. We had a girl here at the park yesterday who was 11 years old and autistic. That's horrible. What that does to kids, just like you're raising a baby for the rest of their life in many cases. There's Mary Tocco's phone number if you want to call her, or marytocco.com. Dr. Kalakarinos said, I found the whole vaccine business was indeed a gigantic hoax. Most doctors are convinced that they are useful, but if you look at the proper statistics and study the instances of these diseases, you will realize this is not so. You cannot immunize sick children, malnourished children, and expect to get away with it. You'll kill far more children than would have died from natural infection. By the way, Jenner is famous for developing the vaccine, right? Now you see the picture of him giving the vaccine to the little boy. The little boy died a couple years later of tuberculosis. Is there something in the vaccine that might have killed him? I don't know. I suspect so. Dr. Mendelsohn said, there's a growing suspicion that immunization against relatively harmless childhood diseases may be responsible for dramatic increase in autoimmune diseases since mass inoculations were introduced. These are fearful diseases such as cancer, leukemia, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, etc. There are all kinds of diseases people are getting. Many folks, including myself, are convinced they're coming largely because of the vaccinations. You're putting poisons into your body. I taught biology. I understand germ theory and how it's supposed to work, okay? I still remain unconvinced. I'm willing to discuss it with anybody. But I defy you to find anything in Scripture that would give the indication that you should put something poisonous into your body to counteract a poison. The theory is, we'll give you a little dose of poison, you build up an immunity, you know, you get the white blood cell count. I know all that. I still remain unconvinced, all right? I think it's a dangerous philosophy to live by. And I think you should encourage people to not get vaccinated, to or at least study the truth before they make a decision like that. This lady wrote me a letter and said, Dr. Hovind, we have a son that has been damaged by the MMR vaccine, mumps, measles, rubella. He lost his ability to walk, talk, and feed himself. The government has a fund that compensates for injuries due to vaccines. Our 8-year-old Jock, would you like to have an 8-year-old that can't walk or talk or feed himself? You know how many parents are in that situation right now? Like tens of thousands of them. Now God can use all that for His glory, and I know when you have a handicapped child it brings out the best in the parents, and Dale Evans and Roy Rodgers wrote the book, Angels Unaware, about the handicapped child that they had for a while and what good it did for their life, and wonderful things can be done. God can get glory out of anything. But to unnecessarily destroy a child's life, which is what's happening, is cruel and criminal. Okay? I don't have the documentation on this story. I'm going to tell you this story, but I'm going to tell you right now I can't document. I don't remember where I read it. I read a lot, and I've studied a lot, and I didn't write it down. One of those things like, oh, that's a great idea, and I missed it. But there was a group of doctors meeting just in the last few years, if I recall the details, and they were getting up testifying about the dangers of vaccinations. Don't vaccinate your kids. This is dangerous. Kids are dying. What are we doing? Why are we vaccinating kids? After these doctors talked about all the horrible things happening with vaccinations, I think 2 or 3 doctors got up in a row who were pediatricians. They said before this group of doctors that were considering, voting on writing a recommendation saying, look, we recommend you not vaccinate your kids. That's what they were considering doing. These pediatricians got up and said 80% of our business, of our income, is from vaccines. If you make this recommendation, you're going to put every pediatrician out of business. So guess what? They didn't vote to recommend against vaccines. Because, nobody eats their own. The doctor's got to take care of each other. After all, Mercedes are expensive, It takes a lot of income to pay for one of them things every month. So, it goes right back to 1 Timothy. The love of money is the root of what? All evil. So if any medical doctors are watching this tape and you're recommending this, you better study what you're doing. People are trusting you for advice. And if you're recommending kids get vaccinated and then they get an autoimmune disease, and many do, and I'm sure you're going to have a cover story of why it happened, oh, it must have got it somewhere else. It wasn't me. Then there's sure going to be a cover story, okay? They always have that, okay? But for the next 70 years, as that mother has to feed and change diapers on her baby, you think about it. You got your $40 or $80 or whatever it was, and they're paying for it for the rest of their life. Think about that long and hard. This goes on to the story here. This lady writes, she says, this business of shots for tots is aimed at seeing to it that children under 2 are fully vaccinated by their doctor's offices. You would not believe what's going on in this area. After studying this for the last 4 years, Satan is seeing to it that well-meaning parents are destroying their baby's immune system by putting over 22 viruses into their system before they are 2. 909shot.com has story after story after story of people destroyed by vaccines. Now, Satan's goal is to reduce the population of the earth. So guess who would be behind something like this? God's plan is to fill the earth. God would not be behind a situation like this. This is an article from marytoko.com's website. This is an article by, or a statement from Dr. Howard Ernovitz. And by the way, he's no slouch. He has a PhD, a degree in microbiology from University of Michigan, Department of Pathology at Washington University. He's the director of molecular and cellular engineering at Zoma Corporation, a senior scientist, Institute of Cancer Medical Research Institute of San Francisco. He developed a cat vaccine against feline leukemia. Okay? He says he believes HIV is a hybrid monkey virus that was in the polio vaccine given to 26 million Americans between 55 and 61 in the form of a sugar cube. How many of you got the sugar cube polio vaccination? I did. You did. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a big deal. You go in, you got this little sugar cube with this drop of red fluid in there, and you eat it. All the kids in school lined up to do it. I'm convinced my oldest brother got polio from the vaccine. Now, he didn't get real crippled by it. He has one leg shorter than the other. I do too. Partially one leg about a quarter inch shorter, not much. But my parents started a club in Peoria, Illinois called the WOW Club, Walking or Wheeling. It was a club for people in wheelchairs. I grew up, from the time I can remember, going to activities, bowling, picnics, parties and stuff with the WOW Club that my parents started, because I grew up with these people in wheelchairs. Many, many, many of them from polio. It was real common I was born in 53, very common in the 50s. Then they claimed they got the cure for polio. I'm not convinced they did. They might have changed the name and got the symptoms a little different. Now call it, something else, multiple sclerosis or something. I don't know. But there's a lot of folks who are really suspicious about this. I don't think they fixed it. I think or like when they started getting diseases that were carried in sick cows, and they said, we got to pasteurize the milk. So they start pasteurizing the milk, which kills almost everything good in the milk. And then some of the diseases go away. Well, at the same time, they started inspecting the herds for sick cows and not taking milk from sick cows. So how do you know which one caused the effect? Is it the pasteurization, or is it the inspecting the herds and not taking milk from sick cows? Of course, guess who took the credit? Pasteurization cured the problem. I would be real cautious about believing that too. But this is a chart. Mary Toko has this on her website of all the states. I just picked a few here in alphabetical order. The percent of increase in autism just over a 10-year span. Did you know Illinois back in '92 had only 5 kids with autism, and then they got 3,800 kids with autism in 2001 and 2? 75,000% increase in autism. Nobody in Mississippi was autistic in '92. All of a sudden it jumps up to 461 10 years later. I mean, any doctor with half of a brain in his head ought to be looking at these statistics and saying, what is causing this? What is causing autism? I don't know why they're not putting the connection together that, hey, maybe it has to do with the poisons we're putting in the kid's system. The vaccines could be causing it. Mary Toko has an article here that says, America has the highest death rate of sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS it's called. I remember one of my neighbors when I was a kid growing up, they said, the baby died in the crib. SIDS baby, sudden infant death. I said, what is that? Baby just died. Parents go in the morning, the baby's dead. In 1970, Australia made vaccines non-mandatory. 50% of the parents opted out of the program, and SIDS dropped by 50% that year. Don't you think somebody with a brain would say, maybe there's a connection? Hello? Why are we vaccinating these babies? Dr. William Torch of the University of Nevada School of Medicine at Reno said 2/3 of the SIDS babies had been vaccinated with DPT in the preceding 3 weeks. Well, if 2/3 of the kids that die in their crib just got a vaccine, somebody ought to put 2 and 2 together, don't you think? You don't need to be a genius to figure that out. You at least should start looking for maybe a possible smoking gun here, all right? Outside of Atlanta, Georgia, You can go about, I'm going to guess 70 or 80 miles, probably more than that. Yeah, 80 or 90 miles, I don't know, east of Atlanta to the little town of Elberton. Elberton is famous for its granite mines. They mine granite there. Of course, Stone Mountain, Georgia is a huge granite rock. If you've never seen that, you ought to go see it. But you go north on Highway 77, about 7 or 8 miles. The Cherokee Indians call this the center of the earth. That was their holy ground, you know, the center of the earth right there, north of Elberton, Georgia. Well, you drive up that road and there's absolutely nothing out there. I mean, it's just zero. Except way off in the distance, about, I don't know, a quarter mile off the highway, you see these rocks sticking up out of the ground, like Stonehenge. I went over there to see them. I said, what is this? I'd heard about them, read about them quite a bit. I said, I want to see it, okay? What you'll see on these rocks is very interesting. There's a stone on the ground that says it's put up by Arthur C. Christian, a pseudonym. In other words, he gave a false name. According to the story, the local story there, the people at the granite quarry that dig out the granite and cut tombstones and stuff out of it and sell it, ship it all over the place, and granite slabs for, you know, countertops and things like that. They said some guy came in, paid cash, Todd had a drawing, said, this is what I want made. Make this for me. On a certain day, I think it's on the equinox or something, or the solstice or whatever, the sun shines through a little hole in the center rock, and it lights up a little spot on the ground. Typical solar sun worshiper guys, you know, oh wow, look at this, we know where the sun's going to be, ha ha, we're smart. We have special knowledge. There are a number of people, myself included, who believe this is part of the Masonic Lodge that paid for this. Okay, now most of the Masons have no idea what they're in. They think they're in a do-gooders club, and they don't realize they're in a satanic organization until it's too late. We had a guy in our church, brother, that came up to me a year ago and said, Brother Hovind, I'm a Mason. I heard you mention in your seminar the Masons are bad. He said, I've been a Mason for 20 years and I got, you know, 32nd degree, whatever it was. He said, why do you say Masons are bad? I've never seen anything bad with the Masons. I said, I'm sure you haven't. I said, would you read a book? He said, yeah. So I gave him the book Beyond the Light, which is available on Chick Publications, chick.com. It's Masonry Beyond the Light. I gave it to him. It was very easy to read. I said, just read this. Let's talk in a couple weeks. A couple weeks later, he came to me at the church over at Marcus Point Baptist Church. Handed my book back and said, I have quit the Masons and I'm encouraging everybody I know to quit the Masons. Thank you for letting me read that book. So I'm not saying all Masons are bad, okay, but there is an evil organization inside that secret club. And you won't know about it till you get to the top, and then it's too late. But here, Arthur C. Christian, which many people think was a Mason, they have, right behind my shoulder, I don't know if you can see it in the picture there, you see the hole in the rock. It's a slot cut through this granite slab that the sun shines through and lights up some spot on the ground, you know, to be some solar solstice sun worshippers. But here, they have what they have on these stones in 12 languages. They have carved the 10 commandments for the New World Order. Commandment number 1, maintain humanity under 500 million, that's a half billion, in perpetual balance with nature. You can go to radioliberty.com or cuttingedge.org and get mountains of stuff about these Georgia Guidestones. Or just go to the internet, type in Georgia Guidestones. You'll see all kinds of stuff on there. They were put up about 1980, if I recall. 25 years ago, they put these stones up and say, one of our first goals is to have a half billion people on the planet. Now, wait. Who was awake an hour ago and remembers how many people are on the planet right now? 6 billion. Their goal is to maintain humanity at a half billion. It looks to me like somebody's going to have to die to make that goal. Like a whole bunch of somebodies. Right? I mean, as far out as it sounds to Christians who don't even think in these terms generally, there are people who would like to wipe out 95% of this planet. They want to kill you. Just because you're breathing air and taking up space. Hitler wanted to kill the Jews just because they were taking up what he called, I forget the German word for it, but it amounts to living space. He said, we need to have more living space for the blonde-haired, blue-eyed German, you know, the superior race. We have much more on this New World Order stuff. We cover some of that stuff in our CSE 101. I don't want to make sure I don't leave anything out since this is our CSE 201. I want to cover all, kick every rabbit, kick every dog, chase every rabbit. We can't as we go around here. 402, okay. I don't know what the future holds. I know who holds the future, okay? And God's got it under control. But regardless of what happens to the population, the fact is the current population of 6 billion people is a clear indicator man has not been here for more than a few thousand years. Even with wars and famines and everything you can imagine thrown at the human population, 6 billion years is plenty to put all the people on the planet. There was a Discovery Channel special a couple years ago. They said, based on DNA studies, scientists are now putting forth the theory that there was a catastrophe 70,000 years ago that reduced the human population to a few thousand, creating a genetic bottleneck. They propose that a volcano caused this near extinction of mankind. You know, I think they're onto something here. Based on DNA studies, there was a genetic bottleneck. Can anybody think where there might have been a genetic bottleneck? Noah's flood. That was, you know, not 70,000, it's only 4,400 years ago. Yeah, there was a genetic bottleneck. You got one family, all starting over again. Okay. Interesting trivia there. Galaxies in space are spinning, but the stars in the middle go faster than the stars at the outside. Now, it's also very interesting. The spiral arms of the galaxies follows the Fibonacci sequence. This would be a rabbit you'll have to chase yourself, okay? But this is a phenomenal study. Just write down golden mean ratio. Has anybody ever studied anything about the golden mean ratio? It'll absolutely blow your mind. There's a video clip, which my son's going to get to me whenever he gets caught up on everything, put out by Walt Disney years and years ago called Math Magic Land, where they have a whole bunch of stuff about the golden mean ratio. Just go to the internet and type in golden mean ratio or type in Fibonacci, who was the Italian scientist in 1100 something and 900 years ago. Fibonacci is spelled F-I-B-I-Nacci, something, I don't know, it's Italian, okay? But Fibonacci, he discovered the ratio of the numbers of a sequence. You go 0, 1, what's the sum of 0 and 1? 1. What's the sum of 1 and 1? 2. What's the sum of 1 and 2? 3. 2 and 3 makes 5. 3 and 5 makes 8. So every number becomes the sum of the two previous numbers. So you go 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. You keep adding these numbers up. Well, you can go forever, of course, and do that. But you find something interesting as you do this. The larger number divided by the smaller number, after the first two or three don't work. But after that, it becomes the larger number divided by the smaller number is 1.618. Always 1.618. Who cares? Well, it's very interesting that the distance between your eyes and the distance from this line to your chin is a ratio of 1 to 1.618. You ever see somebody say, he just looks funny, his eyes are too close together. It just doesn't look right, you know? The human mind seems to work in this called the golden mean ratio. Some things just look pleasing to the eye. Certain sounds sound good to the human ear, like, you know, the major scale on the piano. You know, 1, 3, 5, 8. Well, if you study how many vibrations there are per second of those strings, it is a Fibonacci sequence. Fascinating. If you look at the way the chambered nautilus here, these critters we got in the museum here, if you look at the way the shell curls, the shell follows a curl of a Fibonacci sequence. If you look at the bottom of a pine cone, you see it's got scales that, you know, scales on the pine cone. If you count the scales, they spiral both directions at the same time. Kind of interesting. How can they spiral both directions? But they do. Count the number of scales one way and the number of scales the other way, it'll be a Fibonacci sequence number. You look at the center of a sunflower, and the seeds in the sunflower are arranged in spirals going both directions. Very interesting. Count the number of seeds in the spiral. It'll be a Fibonacci sequence. The ratio of the length of your forearm to the height of your body, I don't know, there's thousands of Fibonacci sequences hidden, the golden mean ratio, hidden in the human body. Off track a little bit, but it's interesting, rabbit to chase. Animals, you see this in animals, you see this all over. The pentagram, the five-pointed star, the five-leaf petal flowers, you know, follow this Fibonacci sequence. We can go on all day on that. Anyway, the galaxies have a perfect spiral ratio that is a Fibonacci, a golden mean ratio. But the stars in the middle are going faster than the stars at the outside, which means they would have lost this spiral shape. within a few billion years, they would not be spiral-shaped. Why do we have spiral galaxies? The Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning, which is in the library there, in the bookstore there, he's a PhD in physics from the Air Force Academy, taught there for years. He now lives in Phoenix, Arizona. His website is creationscience.com. You can read the whole book right on his website, or you can buy it for like $25 or something. Have you read that one yet, Chris? Excellent book. Load, you can read it forever. I mean, load it with notes. I mean, you can bog down forever in that book. He does one thing with his life. He rewrites that book. He's on his 7th edition now, and he's spending 6 more years rewriting it again, adding more stuff, you know, fine-tuning, tweaking. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing book. Anyway, I disagree with Walt on a couple things, and I told him so. Met him at the airport in Phoenix for several hours and said, brother, I love you very much. I sell your book, and you know I'm one of your fans. However, you're wrong about this and this and this. Okay, a few little minor things. But he doesn't believe in a canopy theory, for instance, the canopy before the flood, you know. He would not be King James like I would be. But still, great book. He's got a good section in there about spiral galaxies and how they prove the universe is not billions of years old. Stars are blowing up. It's called a supernova if it's a big one, or a nova if it's a normal one. Stars blow up all the time. About every 30 years, 25 to 30 years, a new supernova is discovered. Okay? ICR, Institute for Creation Research, had an article, an impact article they call it. By the way, if you don't have those, you should get them in your library. They're free if you get on their mailing list. They're on number, I don't know, 390 now or something like that. They've been doing it one a month since September, or since, I don't know, 1974, I believe. I've got them all in the library there if you want to look at some of the old impact articles. They're amazing. So if they're 10 cents a piece, okay? So for $39 you could get all the back issues if you just send them 30 or 40 bucks. So here, send me all the back issues of the impact articles. Amazing reading in those things. But they said in impact article in 1998, I believe it was an impact article that had this, they said, astronomers have observed about every 30 years a star dies and explodes into a supernova. If the universe is billions of years old, how come there are less than 300 supernova, dead stars, ever discovered? Let's assume one every 30 years. There are 300 supernova rings. How many years would that take to accomplish all that? 300 times 30? 9,000. Only 9,000 years worth of stars that are blowing up? If it's billions of years old, why aren't there more? That's a fair question. Are supernovas an indication the universe is less than billions of years old? I think so. Okay? Some people say, well, you know, new stars are forming. No, there are no new stars forming. This is propaganda. We never see a star form. We'll get into more of that in video 7, about 9 years from now. Okay. This textbook says, red giant stars evolve into white dwarf stars over billions of years. On the top one, they've got it taking 100 billion years if it's a small one. If it's an average one, it takes 10 billion. If it's a large one, it can only do it in just a few billion years, boys and girls. And the kids are memorizing this and putting it on the test, you know. Swallow it, puke it back up for the test. Now, hold on a minute. All of them, though, say it takes billions of years for a red giant to turn to a white dwarf. I will not argue about whether red giants turn to white dwarfs. I think they probably do. There's a sequence that stars go through as they burn out their fuel. Of course, they're always burning up. You know, eventually they don't have quite enough gravity to overcome the pressure. And it goes through several stages, but basically it swells up really big and then collapses back, like a marshmallow on a fire, you know. Swells up and then pops back. This is called a nova or supernova. Well, I would agree, stars probably go from red giant to white dwarf. There's a sequence, and you get into physics books and you study this kind of stuff, you know. The sequence that stars go through, they have a helium flash and then they slowly, you know, come back around in a cycle and end up a little bitty white dwarf star. And they're all going to say it takes billions of years for this to happen. I don't think so. The Egyptian hieroglyphics back in 2000 BC described Sirius, which, by the way, Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. Good test question. You writing them down here? Brightest star in the sky is the star Sirius. They said it's a red star. Cicero, back in 50 BC, said Sirius was red. Seneca described Sirius as redder than Mars. Ptolemy listed Sirius as one of the 6 red stars in 150 AD. By the way, back in 150 AD, they said you can see 1,100 stars in the sky. A lot of people counted or tried to count the stars and said about 1,000 to 1,500, that was the range they always come up with. A lot of people, that's about all you can see with the naked eye. Once you get a telescope, though, things open up just a little bit for you, right? There's a whole lot more than that out there. But today, Sirius is a white star. Now, it's a binary star. There are two stars going around each other, you know, like a bolo, like you catch the critters in South America with two balls on the end of a string, you know. By the way, John, we got to make that bolo golfing. Did you see that? Remind me about that. That's amazing. We got to do that here for Dinosaur Adventureland. Who cares? Anyway, we have absolute scientific proof that stars can go from red giants to white dwarfs in 2,000 years. Why do the textbooks say it takes billions of years for this to happen? Yes, sir.
Just a little observation on that little graph on the bottom there about the sizes. The other one, yeah, it says 100 billion.
100 billion.
Oh, they said the whole creation is, or whatever, is 20 billion.
Good point. They say it's 20 billion. Why would they say 100 billion here?
How do they know?
How would you know?
How can you get that?
How would you even know 1 billion?
Yeah.
I think you'd have a hard time knowing something like that, you know. Can't change that one. Okay. So here we have scientific proof it does not take billions of years for this to happen. It can happen in 2,000 years or less. So if anybody tries to use, you know, red giants and white dwarf evolution as evidence for millions of years, you can say, I'm sorry, in spite of all your theories and models, the facts are it doesn't happen. Okay? When, you know, when they study the bumblebee, the size of the bee, the weight of the bee, the size of the wing, it is aeronautically impossible for the bumblebee to fly. Okay, I don't care about your studies, I don't care about your theories, I can show it to you, okay? They can fly just fine. Don't tell the bumblebee he doesn't know that. So in spite of their theories, you know, it's just simply not true. Okay, another proof that the universe is young. The planet Jupiter is cooling off. You say, so what? Well, if you see an object that is cooling off, that would indicate that it used to be warmer. Follow me so far on that one? Okay. This is going to put some kind of time limit. I don't know what it is, but it's not billions of years. If you walked into a room and found a cup of coffee sitting on the table, and I said, oh, don't touch the coffee, it's hot. And you said, well, how old is it? And I said, I don't know, it's been sitting there for 400 years. That'd be kind of hard to believe, don't you think? Or even sitting there for 4 years, or even sitting there for 4 days. It's not going to stay hot for 4 days. These planets that are cooling off, you know, Jupiter is like 5 astronomical units from the sun. Earth is 1, you know, Sun to Earth is 1 astronomical unit, 93 million miles. Mars is 1.5, Jupiter is 5. 5 times farther away than we are from the sun. So it gets sunlight like we do, but that's not near as effective, okay? It's just too far away. Bottom line is it's cooling off, okay? Well, you can't say that this planet is billions of years old. That's not logical. 6,000, that doesn't prove it's 6,000. But certainly if the Jupiter is 6,000 years old, that creates 0 problem for the creationist. Whereas billions would create a problem. Okay, Jupiter has a moon going around it. The moon is named Ganymede, pictured here on the right. Ganymede has a very strong magnetic field. When the spaceship went through Ganymede's magnetic field, as one of the Voyager 1 or 2, I forget, as they're flying out through their Jupiter probe, they said, wow, look at that, there's a magnetic field around this moon. Now, it's been long known that a magnetic field indicates a hot liquid core, like the Earth has a hot liquid core. Sometimes it bubbles up through the top. We call it a volcano. Well, a strong magnetic field indicates liquid core. Now here you got a real problem because you have something much smaller than Jupiter. It's just one of Jupiter's moons. I don't think, if I don't recall the size of Ganymede, smaller than Mars, I think. 1,000, 2,000 miles diameter, maybe 3, I don't know. Somebody will correct me on that, I'm sure. Get some atheists say, oh, see, discount the whole seminar because he didn't know the size of Ganymede. Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Anyway, Ganymede is still hot enough to have a liquid core and still have a magnetic field. So what does that mean? Well, Denver Post ran an article that said this mysterious moon about Ganymede, it should have cooled off billions of years ago. Well, what would that mean? Well, how could it still have a magnetic field? Here, what the scientists are going to do, they're going to spend more money and send another probe up there to try to figure out, how could this magnetic field survive for millions of years? The thought will never cross their mind to question, maybe it's not billions of years old. That thought will never enter their mind, okay? They're not allowed to think that. That's taboo. If you think that, you'll be banned from to academic Siberia. Okay, you're not allowed to think anything against the evolution theory. The planet Saturn has rings around it, but these rings are very unstable. There was an article just in the paper a few days ago. Jonathan gave it to me. I read it on the radio program, and I meant to put it in the seminar. It's one of those things, I lost it. I'll find it again, though. But they said, the rings around Saturn are unstable, and they are, some pieces are being pulled in by Saturn's gravity. Other pieces are spiraling out. How long can an unstable, fragile system last? Would you agree it should have some kind of time limit? What it is, I don't know, but I don't think it's logical to say it is billions of years old. Not logical at all, okay? The moon is going around the Earth. How many of you all knew that already? The moon goes around, okay? As the moon goes, you didn't know that, Albert? As the moon goes around, it's gradually getting farther away. Thomas G. Barnes, who wrote this article here for Impact article number 110 for Institute for Creation Research many, many years ago. What's that, 1982. He was a PhD in physics. He taught at University of Texas, El Paso. He did extensive studies on the Earth's magnetic field, also, by the way, physics professor. But he said, look, the Earth is moving away from the Earth, and that's been long known. When I was in Hawaii, I went to the island of Maui, where they got this huge volcano out there, and up on top of this volcano, they have an observatory, a big, huge telescope. The reason they choose Hawaii is because it's away from most other, city lights. Generally, it's going to be dark. Okay, you look out at Pensacola, walk outside, look up, you see, 30, 40 stars. Drive out in the country, you see 30, 40 bazillion, Well, on top of this observatory, this planetarium in Hawaii, they've got a red laser that they're shooting at the moon. Every time the moon goes by, beep, 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 they're shooting with this laser, trying to calculate the distance to the moon. As the laser bounces back, they catch the distance. Some government project, how those things go. Somebody sitting up there making a bunch of money watching this red thing beep. Well, it has been determined, based on real accurate studies, that the moon is moving away from the Earth. Now, how much? Well, you'll find people argue about that. Anywhere from 3 centimeters, which is 1.25 inches roughly, to 3 inches are the numbers that are generally floating around out there. Some people say more. I don't know. There are several things known to be affecting the moon, to cause the moon to get further away. For instance, as the Earth slows down in its spin, from known factors, we'll get into that in a minute, the slowing spin of the Earth has a strange way of transferring that energy to the moon. You guys that do the Flingosaurus all day, you put the 4 kids on there, you get one kid spinning, everybody else flies up. Now, as they come down, their energy is transferred to the next person. They're not even touching, isn't it? It's really cool, the little Flingosaurus machine we've got out here. Come try it. Who cares? Well, the moon, because of the slowing spin of the Earth, is one reason, probably the primary reason, but the bottom line is the result's the same. The moon is leaving us, let's say 2 or 3 inches a year. Some are going to argue, no, it's only 1.5 inches. Okay, I don't care, it's leaving. Which means, of course, that it used to be closer. If you bring the moon in closer, you start to create a problem because the moon causes the tides. Now, if you're here in Pensacola, tides are something you have to be a little concerned about. Even though, because we're in the Gulf of Mexico and the tides are a little funny the way they work, the moon is pulling up on the water, and the water is trying to bulge up into this big pile because of the moon's gravity, but it runs into stuff like, continents, and it can't get over it. If there were no continents, if the Earth was just covered by water, there would be about a 200-foot tidal change. In theory, it would be every 6 hours. You'd have a high tide. 6 hours later, these folks have a high tide. So because it pulls up on one side, it bulges in on the other. You can study tides on your own, but you get a high tide, low tide, and it would be every 6 hours, except at the same time the moon is moving. The moon's moving very slowly once a month around the Earth, so it ends up being every 6 hours and 25 minutes. You get a tidal change from high tide to low tide. Who cares? Anyway, There are two places where you have really high tides on the planet. The highest tide is up in Canada, the Bay of Fundy, Nova Scotia. The record tidal change is 103 feet, I believe. Tide came up, went back down 103 feet. I was out there at the Bay of Fundy. I've been there several times preaching up there. It's really neat. You can walk out at low tide and you can walk miles and miles out there, but don't get stuck there because that tide comes in like a freight train. It's incredible. The tide comes in so fast, they actually put boats in front of it, and they call it the tidal bore, and you can pay $5 and get on this raft, and it's like you're in the Grand Canyon going down the rapids. It's pushing you upriver like 20 miles. It's phenomenal as the tide goes racing up this river, Bay of Fundy. The second highest tide is in Anchorage, Alaska. Tide changes 30 feet. 40 feet if you have spring tide where the sun and moon are also lined up. Who cares? Anyway, the fact is the tide is affected because of the moon's gravitational pull. If the moon were closer, the tide would be higher. There's a law called the inverse square law. We cover more on that on video 6. But if you brought the moon in to 1/3 the distance, you take the 1/3, inverse it, which means flip it over, and square it. What's 1/3 inversed and squared? 3 squared? How much? 3 times 3? 9. There we go. Gravitational pull would be 9 times greater, not 3 times greater, if the moon were at 1/3 the distance. Well, if you run all the math on this, you'll find out about 1.4 billion years ago, the moon would be touching the Earth. Walt Brown says 1.2 billion years ago. I don't know. What's a few billion between friends, okay? But he's PhD in physics, and I would trust his math pretty good. But bottom line is, certainly less than 4.6 billion years ago. Now here the textbooks are teaching the kids the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. I say, what are you going to do about the moon? You can't have 4.6 billion years to turn your frog to a prince. I'm sorry, you don't have enough time. In spite of the fact we also don't see it happen, okay? There's not enough time for it to happen. So these big numbers they throw out, the 4.6 billion years ago for the Earth, I say, I don't buy it. Well, some people say, well, don't you think maybe the moon was torn out of the Earth and that left behind the Pacific Ocean? Well, let's see. The Pacific Ocean averages about 2.5 miles deep. The moon is 2,000 miles in diameter. No, I don't think the moon pulled out of the Pacific Ocean, okay? 2.5 miles deep. There's not near enough dirt missing there to make the moon, for one thing. And the moon is almost perfectly round. The Earth, because of its spin, it bulges at the equator like I do a little more and more these days. But the moon is nearly perfectly round. That's not going to happen for something pulled out. It's going to be an angular chunk, okay? There's all kinds of mathematics that will say the moon did not originate from the Earth. See, it's long been known the moon is receding. So how does the evolutionist answer this? Well, they got to come up with a theory that maybe it got torn out of the Earth for some reason. That's long been proven wrong, but it's amazing how some people are still teaching that to the kids. To try to, and if you bring up the receding moon in a college class, probably the teacher's going to say, well, maybe that proves the moon originated on the Earth. That'll be their answer. They better study the history of that. Not true. Anyway, so the moon was whizzing around just above the surface of the Earth, and that, of course, explains what happened to the tall dinosaurs. They got mooned to death, okay? Short period comets are flying around through space. These comets are continually losing material. Well, you can't just keep losing. Pretty soon it's gone. It's like your checkbook, if your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall. You cannot just keep losing. You have to, at some point, plug the hole and say, oh, stop losing. Comets have a tail on them. The closer they get to the sun, the bigger the tail becomes. By the way, the tail of the comet has nothing to do with the direction the comet is traveling. That's a hard concept for people to get, but if a comet, let's take my water bottle here. Oh, here we go, the lid. If a comet is flying around the sun, we'll make this the sun. As it gets to here, it's flying this direction. The tail is going that direction. The tail is always perpendicular to the sun. As it can be flying, toward the sun, have a tail behind it. It can be flying away from the sun, and it'll be flying into its own tail. The tail is in front of it. The tail is caused by the solar wind of the sun, and so it has nothing to do with the direction of travel of the comet. Just a little bit of trivia there. Who cares? But anyway, comets have a life expectancy of less than 10,000 years. Littleton, famous astronomer, did a lot of research on this at Oxford in England. He said comets just have a short life expectancy, less than 10,000 years. He said in the article titled Mysteries of the Solar System, but once so deflected into short period comets, these comets must have comparatively short lifetimes, astronomically speaking, and probably no short period comet can survive more than about 10,000 years. Here we have an evolutionist saying 10,000 years is max for a comet. I don't know that that's true, but it's got to have some kind of lifespan. You can't keep losing, okay? It's going to burn up. Madsen wrote an article, there's an anti-Hovind website by a guy named Dave Madsen, one of the over 3,000 or nearly 2,000 anti-Hovind websites. By the way, my son and I answer him on my radio program. Dr. Hovind answers his critics. We have actually have a videotape about that, 8 hours of videotape about answering all the critics of the anti-Hovind websites. But you can tune into our radio program 4:30 to 6 any day, Central Time, and go to Truth Radio or drdino.com and join us on the program. But this Madsen said, Hovind, because I mentioned about the comets proving the Earth's solar system is not even yet 10,000 years old. He said a Dutch astronomer named Jan Oort proposed, that means he hoped, he wished, he prayed, that there was a great shell of comets at the remote frontiers of the solar system. His answer was, yes, we still have comets, but that doesn't prove the solar system is less than 10,000 years old because new ones are coming in to replace the ones that burn out. So sure, they burn out in 10,000 years and then new ones come in to replace them. That's his theory, okay? Madsen said, better statistics in more recent years have supported the existence of the Oort cloud and put it at a distance of 50,000 astronomical units from the Sun. Now, just for your personal information, FYI, the Earth is 1 astronomical unit from the Sun. And it's pretty easy to memorize the distance to the planets by memorizing the astronomical units. Mercury, 0.39. Venus, 0.7. Earth, 1. Mars, 1.5. With that, you can calculate the number of miles if you'd like. Take that number times 93 million. Jupiter, 9. Saturn, Jupiter 5, Saturn 9. I used to know them all. Pluto was just discovered in 1930. I mean, it's really tiny and really far out there. It's hard to see Pluto without a really, really good telescope. And you got to know where to look. Pluto is 39.44 astronomical units away. And you can barely see the thing. There is no possible, and they just discovered another one way out there, a 10th planet. At least they think they've got it pretty well pinned down. And they're going to name it after that movie star Xena. Just what we need. Maybe put her out in space there, but okay. It is impossible to see a comet which is much smaller than a planet at 50,000 astronomical units. How could they possibly know a comet is 50,000 astronomical units away? How did they do this? Well, this Dutch astronomer named Jan Oort was looking at the path the comet is traveling. They watch it travel for a few weeks and look at the arch and say, wow, based on this little piece of the arch, I can calculate how far out it goes. This is ludicrous, okay? Nobody's ever seen this Oort cloud. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. The whole thing's based on a mathematical mistake. Even Littleton said that. He wrote an article called The Non-Existence of the Oort Cometary Shell. Oort proposed a cloud of comets surrounding the solar system based on mathematical errors. He was wrong. Even Carl Sagan said, many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet there's not a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. Nobody's ever seen this thing. But Madsen, in his article about me, said, Hovind, if you want to use the comet argument about this, to prove the Earth is young, it's up to you to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the Oort cloud and other sources don't exist. Now, wait a minute. How could I possibly prove the non-existence of something? Wouldn't you have to be all places at the same instant to prove something doesn't exist? Even if I was really fast and could go all places, which I can't, couldn't they move it between visits and I'd still never find it? He's trying to shift the burden of proof to make it look like I've got a problem with comets. If I said, hey, watermelons are blue on the inside until you cut the skin, prove I'm wrong. That's called shifting the burden of proof. It would be impossible. And he says, I've got to prove there's no comet out there in the Oort cloud. How do I prove there's no? He said, I have to prove the Oort cloud doesn't exist. Dave, nobody ever sees it. Here's what we know. We know we have comets. We know they don't last long. We know the Bible says the earth is about 6,000 years old. I don't have a problem with comets. They fit my theory fine. But he wants it to appear like I've got a problem with comets. I say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy that. I think the heavens declare the glory of God. We'll talk more about that next class, next Thursday. Thanks for joining us. Any questions before we take off?
For more information on other materials offered by Creation Science Evangelism, call us at 850-479-DINO. That's 850-479-3466. Or visit us online at www.drdino.com. That's www.drdino.com.